The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
It is now 9 minutes after 8. A very good morning indeed, and a warm welcome to the Forum at 8 here on SAFM, South Africa's news and information leader. Well then, last week, Wednesday, a very important meeting, presidential high-level dialogue on the economy between, of course, the presidency, government, business, civil society and labour. It took place at the Union Buildings. It was actually a follow-up to one other meeting that took place that other week, the first one on a Friday. Now, a lot of things came out of this meeting, including the proposed freeze on salaries of the CEOs and executives, which President Zuma said at a press conference would be a strong signal of a commitment to build an equitable economy. Let's talk broadly then about what the suggestions are that are coming out of this meeting and what it is that will be done in order to take this economy forward, especially on the back of some negative reporting on this economy that has come through over the past 2 or 3 weeks, months in particular in this country. Let me welcome my guest then on the program to shed some light on this meeting and the importance within the economic space in this country. Let me start with Mr. Sandile Zungu. He is the Secretary General of the Black Business Council. He was attending the meetings. Mr. Zungu, I thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me, Xolani.
Thanks indeed. Here with me in studio, Dr. Azar Jammine. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Econometrics. Dr. Jammine, nice seeing you. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Thank you very much for your time. Aubrey Machikri is a political analyst, research fellow at the Helen Suzman Foundation. Nice talking to you again this morning, Mr. Machikri.
Good morning, Mr. Peter.
Thanks for your time. Let's start with Mr. Zungu. Mr. Zungu, you attended both meetings as far as I understand. Give us the objectives of this dialogue. What does this dialogue aim to achieve?
Well, if we start with the background, the tragic events in Marikana shocked all of us. Business, labor, government, community combined. Subsequent to that, there's been a flurry of wildcat strikes, especially bedeviling the mining industry, gold, platinum. And also there was a strike in the road freight sector, which could be described as having been very violent. And that really triggered a call to have a dialogue, to say where to from here. Because we have got very ambitious targets around employment, we've got ambitious targets around growth, around fighting poverty and so on and so forth. And all of these require cohesion. They require congruency, not only in terms of understanding, but also in terms of behavior among parties. And so that is the context, really, to say, can we develop a new kind of social contract among all the parties as to how do we chart the way forward? And so from that point of view, I think the meeting were very timely. And my belief, having attended both meetings, were that not only were they held in a very frank manner, where parties really pulled no punches, they put on the table what they believed in, but also there was a great deal of decorum, where there were no hurling of insults, but people were really understanding each other's sense of dignity. And therefore the outcomes tended to be satisfactory to all the parties. And therefore I could say, emerging from those meetings, that as South Africans, all of us have capacity to talk with one voice. And indeed, we are talking with one voice.
All right. You talk about the outcomes. Unfortunately, one of the only outcome that we know about in the media, perhaps because of its controversial nature, is the one that says, let there be a freeze on the salaries of chief executive officers and executives. I'll come to that in a minute, Mr. Zungu, but what were the other outcomes of this meeting?
There were many. One of them, for example, was that the law enforcement agencies must do their work. And all the parties to the meeting agreed that the law enforcement agencies must ensure that there's an atmosphere of safety and security. Those who want to assemble must assemble without fear or favor. And those who don't want to assemble must also do so without fear or favor. And the properties of the mines, the properties of employers must be protected. And those who are transgressing and breaking the law must be brought to book. That's a very important commitment that all the parties adhere to. Number two, on the economic front, there was a sense of understanding that the living conditions that the mine workers in particular find themselves in are atrocious, to say the least. And therefore, there's got to be prioritization on improving the living conditions. The issues of housing come to mind here. Lastly, on the economic front again, there was an understanding that to break the back of poverty, to break the back of unemployment and inequalities, government has got to fast-track some of these, massive capital expenditure projects, which are obviously governed by the Presidential Infrastructure Coordination Committee. These are building of dams, expanding rail capacity, expanding, or renewing rolling stock, and so on and so forth. These are quite important from a perspective of improving economic growth and therefore breaking the back of poverty, as I said. So these are all contained in the discussions that we had and in the outcomes that we had. It's just unfortunate that the media focused on one issue, which is sensationalist, around salary freeze, which indeed was adopted in any case.
But why was this adopted? What is the importance of the salary freeze issue anyway?
Look, let's look at a very practical scenario. Workers are demanding 12,500 rands a month. In the context of everything else that the platinum industry is going through or the gold mining industry is going through, the fact that labor accounts for a major part of the cost structure of these mines. To get 1 ounce of platinum out of the ground, it's estimated it costs about $1,500 currently. And now if you increase labor to an unacceptable level, you obviously threaten the viability of some of those shafts. You obviously, are threatening the employment targets that we have set for ourselves. Fair enough. But if you are having at the same time a CEO of a company saying, he got 60 million rands for the previous year, it raises serious contradictions around the morality of our system. One may argue that there's a supply and demand issue here. A high-performing CEO must get what he wants. But at the same time, you could argue that the rock drillers, by withholding their labor, they are creating an artificial supply and demand situation. Are you therefore saying that they must also demand higher wages as a result of that? So there's an element of contradiction that we have to deal with. But we as business, both black and white, both under Black Business Council and under BLSA or BUSA, committed ourselves to impressing upon our members to consider a salary freeze, at least for a period of 12 months, both salary and bonuses, as a demonstration of good faith and goodwill that during these trying times, very difficult measures need to be considered. And these are unprecedented measures, but very important.
All right. Let me bring in my other guest then. Let me start with you, Dr. Jamin. You've obviously, together with us, gotten the context of what was happening here. Now, in an article yesterday, Mr. Zungu was quoted as saying that the president's move here was bold leadership. What are your thoughts on this summit?
To some extent, one welcomes that a summit was convened. The question one asks is, why was it not convened a long, long time ago? And the second question that I keep asking myself is, this is to try and get cohesion and congruency, as Mr. Zungu suggested. The government itself has already tabled and endorsed a comprehensive program to address all the weaknesses structurally in the South African economy in the form of a National Development Plan. Why have we heard so little about this, either from the government itself or the media? One had to look very hard to see that the cabinet had actually endorsed the National Development Plan. That plan is deliberately geared towards trying to diffuse some of the tensions economically in this country, trying to reduce unemployment and poverty and inequality. Why has it received so little coverage, either in the media or by government officials themselves? Why did we have to have now a special summit dealing with all sorts of other things without actually addressing what already exists on the table as a cohesive plan to mobilize all the resources in the country towards a common goal.
Because, and I'm going to go to Aubrey to answer that question, because he may have a political answer to that question. The issue, though, Dr. Dlamini, is that some may argue, is there a place for a social compact in this country, given these problems that Mr. Zungu articulated in Marikana, the truck industry, and so on, some of the strike. So some may argue that actually we do need some sort of a social compact.
Well, we do need a social compact, but what bothered me about this was that the responses were almost knee-jerk. They almost seemed to be panic reactions to certain events that have taken place, whereas leadership should have ensured that we did not have to end up with a Marikana-type situation in order to diffuse some of these. And movements towards a social compact should have been in place years ago. And
Okay, we seem to have lost one line. I suspect it may be Mr. Zungu's line, and he did mention that perhaps his line may be a little difficult. Just continue as well.
And the fact is that one would have thought that was precisely why the National Planning Commission was called upon to develop a plan to actually address these structural weaknesses, and it did its job. Now, why was there absolutely no reference to this?
Mr. Machigwe, let me bring you in then, particularly on the question of the National Development Plan, because then if what Dr. Dlamini is saying is anything to go by, then this meeting only seems to try to reinvent the wheel. We've already got the answers.
Well, Perpetua, I personally would like to locate the meeting of the social partners and the National Development Plan in the broader context of the challenges facing the country and how all of us should be responding to those challenges. We have many plans. We have a new growth plan. We have the National Development Plan. I know that in the public service there's an attempt to do some thinking about repositioning the public service. You have some thinking taking place all over the place about how this country can change direction and give effect to the promise of a better life for all South Africans. What I have not seen is genuine commitment on the part of the social partners to these plans. And this lack of commitment betrays itself in terms of a failure to unite behind a common vision for the country. What dominates the discourse about how we can change the lived reality of our people is still an attempt to hold on to narrow interests and to define the challenges and the solutions in accordance with those narrow interests. That is how, for me, this lack of commitment betrays itself. We should call the meeting of the social partners what it is. It was a crisis meeting. In fact, Marikana and the strikes that spread from Marikana, the transport strike, and other forms of instability in the labor relations space do not constitute the crisis. The crises are the conditions that have given birth to that instability in the labor relations space. And personally, it is my view that it is our refusal to talk about the real crisis, that is the underlying causes of what now we pretend is the crisis, which is going to make it difficult for the country to unite behind a common vision and implement the plans that it has put on the table. So what is required on the part of all social partners, firstly, is a bit of honesty. And secondly, what is required is for them to tell the country what it is they are willing to concede and sacrifice for the greater good. What is required is not for us to be selective about what we see, because a lot of what we hear and read in the discourse is informed by selective perception. And that selective perception is caused in part by the fact that when someone throws the idea of a social contract or a social compact, we then pretend that the idea is valueless. I'll give one example. People bemoan lack of leadership in this country, but we're not talking about the same thing. From where I'm sitting, it seems when people talk about lack of leadership, what they bemoan is the lack of leaders who lead in pursuit of their narrow interests. And as long as our ways of thinking and our ways of seeing about what should happen in this country are informed by this selective perception, a selective perception that seeks to bolster our accumulated narrow interests, we are not going to solve the problems which face this country.
All right, Mr. Machiko, thank you. Let me go back to Mr. Zungu. Mr. Zungu, I just hope you're still with me there on the line. I know that you did mention that because you're driving and we may have a little bit of a problem with the line. But how do you respond then? A little earlier on we heard from Dr. Jamin. He's asking why not a long time ago, why this meeting had to happen now. I suppose a point that's also been supported by Mr. Machiko, who says this was nothing but a crisis meeting.
Well, I agree with Mr. Machiko's perspective. I mean, if the president had convened a summit of that scale and magnitude soon after Marikana, people may have said that's a knee-jerk reaction. Why don't you wait for the Commission of Inquiry to conclude its work on Marikana, because it's a very complex situation, before you convene a summit on the outcomes of such. This was a crisis meeting. If one may call it that, was the word crisis flew quite feverishly in that meeting anyway. So it was a crisis meeting to look at pertinent issues facing South Africa, especially on the industrial relations front, as we talk now. So in a way, I think we need to give credit where it's due. That the president came to the party and provided that leadership that we so frequently bemoan, and basically called all the social partners to think and come up with one voice on these issues. And I think we are much closer to that space where we are regaining confidence in ourselves and our society.
Sure. Dr. Jamin, let me ask you about the interventions then proposed. One of the interventions, of course, with which you've taken issue is the issue of the salary freeze.
Well, I've taken issue with it only in the sense that I believe it was not thought out properly. I would like to place on record that at no stage do I suggest that the massive and growing levels of inequality that we see between the working class and the executive class are sustainable or even ethical in the broader scheme of things. But one has to recognize that this is an outcome that is not peculiarly South African. It is a global phenomenon. It is linked to the loose monetary policies worldwide that are driving assets driving money ever increasingly into financial assets rather than into real economic activity. And who are the holders of those financial assets? It's a certain class of people who benefit proportionately from the rise in the share prices that they get, and they get bigger bonuses. It's also a function of the growth of technology and the information flow in the world during an environment of increased globalization and computerization, which has led to a massive digital divide between the poor and those fortunate enough to be on the right side of the divide. It's also a function of the system of corporate governance that we have in a capitalistic world, where boards of governors are virtually held to ransom by executives wanting higher pay.
The issue, however, Dr. Jamin, is that it may not necessarily change that much on the ground, but as a signal, as a symbol of solidarity with those who are less fortunate, let's put it that way, perhaps it may work. The issue is about social cohesion here. The issue is about saying, look, yes, senior executives earn these obscene amounts of money, but actually we can sympathize with those that does it not work on that level?
Well, it may work on that level, but it has costs on another level, and I've indicated the one big cost is that suddenly you have a shortfall in your personal tax revenues because these senior executives are major contributors towards the fiscus. And that hadn't been thought through in terms of how do you then compensate on the other side in terms of generating enough money for government to carry on with its social projects.
Can I come in here?
Yes, please do, yeah.
Yeah, you see, that's where the difficulty really is. 5 billion rand that, Azza has quoted previously as the shortfall on the fiscus with this bold decision that we took. Yes, it may be true. I'm not sure how scientific, correct that number is, but I've got no reason to doubt, our eminent economist at all. But what is very important here is that what is the long-term cost to the economy of this inequality that we see now? Not only on financial terms, economic terms, but also on social terms. I believe that is massive, and we've got to begin now to actually bridge this inequality. Otherwise, even if we are the odd country out that actually takes this bold decision, let it be. Because to say because the whole world does this and we're not the only country, it does not mean that we must accept what is effectively ethically unjustifiable. So this decision that we took as leaders of business to say let's persuade our members, we cannot force them, absolutely not, but let's persuade them to think very seriously about capping salaries, increases, and obviously to forgo some of the bonuses just for a period of 12 months is actually a good thing. I think our other social partners appreciated that.
Interesting, because you say that. Just a quick question for you before I take the headlines then, Mr. Zungu. What was government's response? Is government also going to persuade its top leadership to also take the salary caps?
It's even easier with government because it's a single employer, largely in parastatals and government departments. So I think they will come up with a mechanism, whether it's a rule or a decree. I don't know what terminology to use for that, but that definitely determined to follow suit as well, especially with parastatals, because similarly, salaries and benefits, they are quite obscene.
Indeed. All right. Let me do this. Let me take the news headlines now because it is 8:30. But open the lines as well. 0891 104 208. 0891 104 208. Let's then talk to South Africans about these suggestions. Sandile Zungu is the Secretary General of the Black Business Council, is my guest on the line. Also, Aubrey Machikri, political analyst, research fellow at Helen Suzman Foundation, as well as Dr. Azza Jammine, who's here with me in studio this morning, is the Chief Executive Officer of Econometrics. What do you think about the meeting that took place last week and some of the suggestions that you would have heard this morning? 0891 104 208. I'll also take emails. gwala@sabc.co.za.
The Forum at 8 with Xolani Gwala.
And of course, the forum continues until 9 o'clock here on SAFM, 9 to 12. Morning Talk with Sigelelo Mkabadeli. She's in East London today, so don't miss Sigi on Morning Talk, 9 to 12 here on SAFM. For now, though, let's hear your thoughts about the presidential summit, the presidential meeting, high-level dialogue on economy with business, civil society and labor, which took place at the Union Buildings last week. Let me read one or two SMSs, then I'll go to Prophet OJ, Frank Talk, and Mangaung, Bukhos in Kelvin, Nil in Durban, and get responses from my guests. Let me start with this SMS here that says the claim that there will be a 5 billion rand shortfall in taxes is nonsense. That SMS is not signed. But there's another one from Pasega Makoti who says the so-called freeze will teach honest talent to steal. Everyone leaves as once as owning a 200 million rand palace. Forward with the revolution. Another one, Mike, says who is running the country? Is it social partners or the government? We need leadership here. There is ELAD in the Eastern Cape, I think, that says let CEOs and presidents pay themselves what they like from the available pool of money, provided they pay their lowest workers 5% of their pay. Another one, Joyce Banda takes a cut from an already small salary and Jacob Zuma talks freezing. There is no freezing in Nkandla. Our president is a hypocrite. There's K who says it is a commendable thing for the BBC, but for a president I don't think so. What about the NDP? Or has he not studied it yet? Bottom line is that JZ is clueless. That's according to K on SMS. Mari says, joke, Zuma spends taxpayers' money like there's no tomorrow. JZ should lead by example, but he takes fat increase in his already fat salary. Gerald in Cape Town says that. And let's just quickly go to the lines then. Prophet OJ, hello.
Good morning, Xolani, and how are you? I'm saved by the blood of God, Jesus Christ, and I love you.
Thank you very much for calling.
Yeah, look, Xolani, if the summit could have come out with with a date on which various sectors of the country would meet on what we could term an economic vision in Indaba, where all issues around the economy would be discussed and come out with a common vision for the economy of the country, which will speak, to issues like living wage, pricing of items, transformation of investment policy, and economic transparency. An issue like freezing the increase of salaries for executives would not be an issue now, because if we had long ago resolved an issue of a living wage, this could have been addressed a long time ago. My issue here is that South Africans do not need only things like a planning commission or DIPSA or PEE or growth path or nationalization or land grabs or socialist ideologies. But South Africa needs people who can sit around the table and decide through a debate an economic vision for the country.
All right, that's Papa OJ in Mahikeng. Thank you. Frank Talk in Mangaung, good morning.
Good morning, Xolani. A quick one, Xolani, really. I support the austerity measures. But equally, I don't know whether, we could have a special fund where this money would go into. And really, I wouldn't want to see my money going to somebody who decides to go to McDonald's and see a portrait and buy it using a government credit card. So there should be, measures in all respects to say, how do we even make sure that people do not get corrupted? Because you see, it will be an insult to say executives and other people should take a salary cut. Yet there are people who use public funds for things that they are not meant for. Now, quickly, Xolani, I support what Professor OJ has said on the economic Indaba. We need that. Because on the Marikana issue, it's a question of, yes, we all agree, the employees, labor is exploited in mining. But in as much as you could give them whatever money, Xolani, they still have to support extended families where they live and somewhere where they come from, whether it's the Eastern Cape or it's in the Free State of KwaZulu-Natal. So without addressing the real causes, as Machiko says, we are fooling ourselves. We have to go to the direct cause. And the direct cause in this country is the structural economy, which is resulting to a lot of equality, especially on black people.
All right, thank you very much, Frank Talk in Mangaung. Neil is in Durban. Hello, Neil. Neil, are you there? Do we have Neil on the line?
Yes. Xolani, on my side, I just want to say, we've got to lead by example.
Yeah.
If I'm not a disciplined parent, my kids are not going to listen to me. The president can, by the stroke, bring up international acclaim by just saying, not only am I not going to accept an increase in my salary, I will even take a pay cut myself first. And he will bring such neutrality and such credibility to his office for the first time this year. Let's see if he can do it on primetime TV. Thank you.
That's Neil in Durban. Bukhosi and Calvin, hello.
Pepet.
Yebo.
Hey, bleak weekend, Arsenal and Swallows. Anyway, Pepet, you know what? The government doesn't have the courage of its convictions. As evidenced by what has been happening in housing, health, railroads, skills development, and education. Now we're talking about Manuel's National Development Plan, and then the latest we have in this PICC. For these things to happen, Pepet, we need a paradigm shift. And to have a paradigm shift, you need an effective drastic implementation policy, which this government lacks. And that can only be achieved by a citizen that is exposed to a technology, to an education that is technologically sound and modern education system. The story of 1948, Xolani, I keep on repeating. for the Afrikaners to come to where they were from 1948 to 1994. They embarked on a strict and very vigorous education implementation. Hence, the technology that they were able to develop. I mean, the Sasols of this world, Suid-Afrikaanse Steenkool and Olie Industries, as they called it. They were the first to develop or to discover that oil can be harnessed from coal. This country was the first country in Africa to build a nuclear station, and it was even said that they exploded a nuclear device, which they denied later on.
Sure.
But without a sound education, Xolani, we will not be able to achieve that paradigm shift that is so important to get us moving.
Okay. Right, that's Bukhosi and Kelvin. Thank you very much. Let me get responses. Perhaps start with Mr. Aubrey Machikri. Mr. Machikri?
Well, as you know, Perpetua, in Zulu they say, "Elempofana dwela phansi." The words of a poor person have no impact, they fall on the ground. In a sense, this describes the ideas that have become hegemonic in the discourse about the economy and how we should tackle the challenges of unemployment, inequality, and poverty in this country. And as a result, what tends to happen is that when money talks, or when those who speak on behalf of money talk, the rest of us just mumble about how we should deal with these challenges. So what happens, and as we saw in the responses to the meeting of the social partners, is that instead of talking about income inequality as a component of inequality, and say to ourselves that actually the challenge is to increase wages or incomes at the bottom at a much higher and much faster rate than wages at the top, we change the subject and we rearrange the facts. An example, to divert attention from the problem of income inequality, we then change the subject and start talking about 238 million rand that is being spent on the upgrade of the president's residence. Now, we have valid reasons to question that expenditure, but unfortunately some of us raise that dishonestly in order to divert attention from the challenge of inequality and the challenge of income inequality as a component of that inequality. And the point I keep on making, Xolani, is that the lived reality of our people, the lived reality of the people of Marikana and elsewhere in this country, speaks more eloquently and more honestly about our reality of inequality, unemployment, and poverty.
Okay.
And we can rearrange the facts and make economic statistics say things they are not telling us all we like. That lived reality is not going to change, which means these attempts at a social contract are not going to act are not going to materialize into anything useful because of a deficit of honesty in the discourse.
All right, that's and he said it's the second time that Mr. Machikri is raising this issue of honesty, Dr. Jamin.
Yes, very much so. I'd like to just endorse what Mokhosi said, and that is that at the heart of the problem of inequality in this country, as in many other countries in the world, but it's probably far more acute in this country. I've given a whole lot of factors contributing to it, but the biggest one of all is the shortfall, the deficit in education of the majority of people. And the reference to the fact that how the Afrikaner built himself up, unfortunately not always to very commendable ends, but some of them were commendable in terms of building up education, fanatically, obsession with improving their educational quality so as to develop the Sasols and the Escoms of the world. And that is what is needed. We need leadership to actually lead the way in that regard, because we've got a situation currently where the majority of the people in this country just do not have sufficient education to be employed in anything but menial jobs which are very poorly paid. And on the other side, there is a relative shortage of skills, which I think is probably exaggerated, but does contribute to the interface with corporate governance, whereby executives say, well, if you don't pay me more, I'm going to leave, and then you're going to have to look for another executive to do that job.
You touch on the issue of leadership. Business Times quoted you yesterday as saying that what we need is a change at the top in this country. We're going through a leadership crisis. It needs an appropriate president, you were quoted as saying.
Yes, I'm suggesting that there are many people. You know, the fact that it's taken so long to actually come to grips and realize that we're in a crisis here, to me, smacks of a lack of understanding of the directions in which we're going and the harmful effects that will have, and ending up with Marikana. We need someone who understands these crises. And all I'm suggesting is that the intellectual fabric of our society is still rich enough to have produced leaders that could actually take the leadership in foreseeing the kind of...
I'm going to bring in Mr.
leadership, Colin.
Let me ask on the leadership, Dr. Jamin, because again, the issue has been raised. Which leadership are you talking about in particular? Political leadership? Because there's business leadership, political leadership, civil society here. Why is it that it's almost always, pointing in the government direction when in fact even business has got a role to play?
I do agree with you. I think there's leadership in every one of the businesses too scared to speak out. But partly because the moment that it does speak out, it gets lambasted like crazy, and then has to totally is kind of pushed into submission. The same thing with civil society. So people are not allowed to speak out sufficiently without being lambasted.
The issue, though, of
it.
speaking out, and Mr. Machiko pointed this out a little bit earlier on, is that you find people speaking out only as it serves their interest, and not necessarily as it, for instance, deals with issues of inequality in society.
Yes, I would tend to agree with that, and there has to be a far greater social cohesion in the country. And I would draw attention to the fact that the National Development Plan actually draws attention to this fact and actually puts forward concrete recommendations on how to resolve the lack of social cohesion.
Okay. Let me start with Mr. Zungu again, in response particularly to the issues of leadership, Mr. Zungu.
Well, leadership is in general, both government and business, as well as trade union and just societal leadership, community leadership. I think there's a sense of admission that maybe we're not operating at an optimal level, and I think we can rise up to where we should be. This dialogue that we had in the last 10 days on two meetings is a very commendable attempt at creating that platform where we can talk to each other. Instead of speaking out, we must speak in. So the focus must not be to lambaste, but must be to construct and to have a dialogue and a discourse that actually can come up with solutions that are better from a collective than from one party. I think that that is admission on the side of business as well, that we have not really been as patriotic. I know it's a term that is contestable, but we have not, as business, been as patriotic as we ought to be. We have not risen to the challenges of poverty that is bedeviling our people as we ought to have done. Bridging inequalities that are quite rife. We're actually far worse than Brazil, which was a leader in terms of inequalities now, and that itself is a crisis because it talks to the issue of earnings. We as business, therefore, have got to come to the party. I think another point that I wanted to just highlight, the issue of education. I think we're all in agreement that long term we've got to pay great attention to the issue of education, so that through education we can elevate our people to the level where they can compete not among themselves only, but also globally. But to say the Afrikaners did this during apartheid is, in my opinion, an attempt at glorifying the negative. Afrikaners improved on themselves and improve their level of education at the expense of black people. I cannot get to the level where I'm glorifying the negative. I think we were robbed of an opportunity to empower ourselves over decades and centuries, to say the least. But clearly, education lies at the center of how we can be at the level where we can compete at a global level. Absolutely.
Right. Sure. Mr. Mjikwa, let me ask you to come in then. You wanted to say something.
No, let's start with the question of education.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's the idea that our education system is underperforming is no longer controversial. But the idea that we should take our example from the National Party during apartheid is untenable. Because when they prioritized education, they prioritized it for a section of the population. And we're talking about a different challenge today, that of prioritizing education for all South Africans, in the interest of all South Africans. Now, because we're talking about leadership, what we lack are leaders, and therefore leadership that should transcend the narrow interests of all social partners. And until we get such leadership, it's going to be very difficult to unite, as I keep on saying, South Africa behind a common vision. So what we need going forward is, first of all, between government and business, to deal with the high level of mistrust. We still persist between the two.
I wonder how you deal with that, though.
For instance, Kolani, we talk about creating jobs and growing the economy, when, in effect, the corporate sector in South Africa is sitting on the biggest mountain of cash in its history, which it is not investing in the economy. And, of course, they invoke issues such as political uncertainty and policy uncertainty, as a result of which risk aversion is very high. On the other, the government is saying, or voices in the ANC are saying, that the state must be more interventionist and play a bigger role in the economy, partly because they are losing confidence in the private sector as reliable partners in the fight against poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And the solution are leaders who will tell all social partners things they don't want to hear. And secondly, leaders who will make the country understand that neither big business or the market on the one hand, nor the state on the other, can change South Africa on its own.
That's interesting, Dr. Azaj. I mean, you've got to come in here about this mistrust between government and business. How do you deal with that issue?
I do believe that it is at the heart of part of our problem, and I think part of it is related to racial configuration, whereby the business sector is still dominated by pale males, and the government is dominated by black Africans. And so there is this kind of concept where the business sector is still saying, oh, well, the government is black, they don't know what, how to run the country. And conversely, you've got a government that says, these are the big wigs who exploited us for so many years, and now they're in a position of affluence. And we've got to, it's a huge challenge. And that is where you need a leader that can actually bring all parties together. And again, I have to come back to the NDP, because it does actually address these issues, and I do not see why a proper leadership cannot mobilize all sectors of society behind a common vision that is incorporated into a very well thought out holistic plan of action, drawn up by 26 people who had no, the majority of whom had no political aspirations, who were drawn from different sectors of society merely because of their actual expertise.
Mr. Zungu, do you want to comment on this element that's been introduced by Machiko here of the trust or lack thereof between business and government?
Well, I mean, there is no doubt, Kolani, that the level of trust that exists among the social partners should fill all of us with shame. It's not at the level where we can say we're anywhere close to building consensus and hegemony and congruency and proper, sustainable social cohesion. But attempts such as convening a summit of last week and Friday the other week are commendable attempts, because as soon as you get the social partners talking, then you'll be somewhere closer to bridging this issue of trust. Of course, the issue of NEDLAC as an institution for social dialogue needs to be strengthened, because it's a standing structure, it's doing its work, and all of the parties must take that structure seriously. And so from a point of view of leadership, I think I don't think we're lacking at all. By the way, over talking for the National Development Plan may do injustice to it, because I don't think, from what I've seen, I don't think there's an attempt to muzzle the National Development Plan and its outcomes. But the NDP, among other interventions, the Industrial Policy Action Plan, the New Growth Path, are many interventions that are all united in trying to take this country forward in terms of industrial capacity, growth, unemployment, poverty, and so on and so forth. They're all working in the same direction. They're not mutually exclusive. The time for the country to be focused on the National Development Plan and its outcomes and findings will come, and I think we must look forward to that.
Okay. Let me wrap up then by looking at one or two emails. Then I'm going to get my guests to just give me their last comments. Nandipa says, stop slamming everything the Afrikaners did. Learn from them. Learn how to prioritize education for all. You do not have to agree with everything they did. That's an email from Nandi Power. Another one came through from Tapelo. My wish is to see the red tape in government being dealt with, because South Africa needs flexible implementation of ideas suggested. Otherwise, we will keep on having this indabas over and over again without any progress. Tapelo on email. Another email came through from Audrey. This rhetoric of Bukhosi about the Afrikaners is stupid, considering that Afrikaners are a minority and they looked only after themselves, leaving behind the majority of black people in poverty. Yes, government must do more because they know our plight better. That's Audrey in Pretoria on email. Another email came through from Celia, who says, with all due respect to the highest office in the land, I disagree with the president's suggestion. The imbalances that are evident today are not a new revelation to us. For the president to single out private entities to resolve this problem, whereas an uncontrolled tap in the public sector is oozing taxpayers' money, is short-sighted. I believe we'll make better progress towards resolving this problem by reviewing both our National Development Plan and the National Growth Plan, and also ensure that the roles of both public and private sectors are clearly outlined therein. Further to that, strict implementation of those plans will be key. Lots of emails came through. Let me just start with Dr. Dlamini again, just wrapping up for me. What should we be doing immediately going forward?
The most urgent thing, as far as I'm concerned, is to just obsess ourselves with trying to get this educational system correct in order to empower the majority of people in this country with the ability to think things through and to command higher salaries.
Mr. Machibwe, your thoughts on what should happen immediately?
Well, let me pose the challenge differently and broadly. The Freedom Charter says South Africa belongs to all who live in it. But when I look at the lived reality of our people, we seem to be saying to them, the economy does not belong to all who live in South Africa. And that must change. Because if it does not change, there will come the day when our people will turn around and look at that clause in the Freedom Charter and look at it as an act of dispossession.
And Mr. Zungu?
Well, long term, we have to focus on education. The outcomes are long. In the short term, I think we must have this dialogue among social partners elevated to a level of importance where we can talk to each other and build a common understanding.
Fantastic. I thank you all for your time this morning. Really, really important to us. Sandile Zungu, Secretary General of the Black Business Council, Dr. Azar Jammeh, Chief Executive Officer of the Econometrics, here with me in studio, as well as Mr. Aubrey Machibwe, a political analyst as well as a research fellow at the Helen Suzman Foundation. Thank you all for coming. Thanks indeed for your time. Thanks to the team who put it all together for us this day. Thank you for listening to the program. Your SMSs, your calls, unfortunately couldn't get through to each and every one of you who called. Neither could we read all the SMSs and emails. We'll certainly try and make some time and do so in the future. It's now time for Morning Talk. Then from all of us here at AM Live, we wish you a great day ahead. Cheers. Ahead. Cheers. Ahead. Cheers. Ahead. Cheers. Ahead. Cheers. Ahead. Cheers.